If someone says, "Are you Christian?" I can say, "Tell me what you think a Christian is," and we can figure out if that fits. We can do that with anything. I'm conservative. Oh, fantastic. What do you want to conserve? Let's talk. Or I'm liberal. Okay, who do you want to see liberated? And we can do that. The labels are the costliest mental shortcut in our lives. We can say, what do you mean by that?
Hey, welcome to Reculture. My name is CJ Castiata. This is a podcast about better messages. Messages that don't just tell us what to react to. There are too many of those out there right now, in my opinion. But messages that actually help us understand the moment that we're in. Messages that don't just grab our attention, because attention is fleeting, but then point us somewhere after our attention is captured. Because whether we are navigating a brand or a team or a family or even just the world right now, we're all living inside stories. And the most important story we can navigate is whatever story we're in the midst of becoming. So when I work with a brand, one of the questions that I'm just constantly thinking about, constantly asking is like, what actually survives? Like not the logo, not the language, but what still means the same thing after the company grows, right? After leadership changes, after AI gets introduced, or after the market shifts. And so on the previous episode, we talked about culture and how really the biggest challenge for brands, for institutions, for individuals even right now is to preserve meaning in the face of change, in the face of uncertainty, in the face of complexity, in the face of corruption. Right now, all that change, all that complexity, all that uncertainty makes it pretty hard for anything to actually mean something. Right? Every day we have more things competing to tell us what's actually important. We have more content than ever before. We have more language than ever before. We literally have these large language models producing content at a rate that no one in their right mind can possibly keep up with. And the knee-jerk response is nihilism. And we're seeing that, right? None of this matters. Meaning is over. I'm just going to kind of phone it in from now on. And that creates distrust and disillusionment. And it's not really great for things like productivity, innovation, and getting things done in general. And so the opposite of all that is meaning. And culture is this collective embodiment of meaning. It's what meaning looks like once people begin living it together. It's the things that survive all that change and all that disruption and comes out the other end and says, this is what still matters. And so this is great because here is the thing. We cannot talk about any of this without eventually talking about religion, which already you might be reaching for the skip button, but just hear me out for a minute, because whether we like it or not, we've got these three major belief systems and then some that are deeply influencing the way people behave, view the world, and decide what is important. So on this episode, we're actually going to sit down with both a Muslim and a Christian who have dedicated much of their lives, much of their professional lives related to the messy work of trying to reconcile the culture they come from with the fact that the world has inevitably changed a lot since those cultures were first formed. They're trying to preserve the meaning they feel still matters while shedding the inherited assumptions they believe no longer serve them or society. And what's wild is that this is not a debate between two religions. In fact, it was super insightful to see how similar these two people's journeys have been. So my hope is that you'd listen to this and infuse it into whatever story you're leading, whatever you're navigating, because if two of the world's biggest belief systems can survive and adapt without losing what matters, what's at their core, then there's got to be hope for all of us who are leading, slightly smaller cultures. Because honestly, whether it's a religion or a company or a family, every culture eventually faces the same question: what deserves to survive into the next chapter? So this conversation was recorded at our Reculture Live event in Los Angeles earlier this year, and it's moderated by my good friend and co-host for the event, Esteban Gast, and it features our two guests. Okay, so Misha Euceph she's this award-winning writer and producer. She's won like a Tribeca and a Signal and a Webby, lots of awards. She produced the Michelle Obama podcast, and then her own podcast, Tell Them I Am, was called like one of the best podcasts by Time, The Atlantic, Esquire, like multiple outlets. I think the New York Times said it too. She's also working on her first book right now, which is super exciting. And then she is joined by Dr. David Dark, who is an author, and he's a professor, and he's a guest lecturer teaching at Belmont University in Nashville. And his book, The Gospel According to America, what a great title, was included in Publishers Weekly's top religious books in 2005. And then he's got a new book. He's got multiple books in between, but his new book is called Everyday Apocalypse, Art, Empire, and the End of the World. So this is a fascinating conversation. Esteban does such a great job asking tough questions. Enjoy.
So I'm so curious. The two of you I feel like the way that you show up in your writing and in the world is you say, yes, I am Christian. Yes, I am Muslim. And you know that maybe that carries baggage. And so I'm curious what the arc was for the two of you to say, yes, I am this religion. And if you ever, because I see you grapple with it in your work and writing. So I'm curious what that arc was for you.
Okay, I'll go. So I'm David Dark of Nashville. And I was really formed by church, a particular church. And I really wanted Godzilla and God to be not the same, but I wanted to have both. I wanted comic books, I wanted the Twilight Zone and the Bible. And I think I'm obsessive in such a way that I have refused the distinction between the sacred and the secular my whole life long. And I think that the division dissolves upon contact with the way the heart really works. We love what we love, and I really wanted my faith to be a part of the thing. I didn't like the idea that people would think, oh, Christian, got it, I know what you are. And I've just been fighting that for a long time. The word witness is important to me on this because I am Presbyterian, but I'm also Radiohead and Doctor Who and Star Trek. There is a white supremacist terror movement afoot in this country. It is backed, it has control of many governments, federal, state, local, and it has been successfully marketed as Christianity. Christo-fascism, if you like. And so if Christianity is a prophetic philosopher peasant movement of beloved community, hooray for Christianity. But often Christianity has been successfully marketed as empire in a way. We're looking at empire baptized, christened by abusive people. And too much of parts of the tradition have been useful in the strategies of abusive people. So I have a fight in this. So I don't like how words like faith and religion end up being conversation stoppers. So part of my life's work, I think, is to open that door back up when it's been shut.
I have a very similar arc and belief system, but applied through the lens of Islam. One of my favorite stories in the Bible and in the Quran is the story of when Moses goes to the burning bush or comes across the burning bush for the very first time and is blown away or is in a state of total awe in the presence of God. And in that moment, Moses has a conversation with this voice of God, whether literal or metaphorical, however you want to look at it. And it's this beautiful moment because Moses asks God to define himself. And the word that God uses to name himself or to define himself is Yahweh, which means, or can be translated as, there's a lot of scholarly debate, but can be translated as I am, I was, and I will be. And I have been obsessed with small stories like that in scripture since I was a little girl. It is a very weird obsession to have. It gets in the way of you being cool, but I am determined to be both. That story really resonated for me for a very long time because it spoke to this idea of we transcend labels. And if our goal is to emulate not just prophets and messengers, but to emulate God, then our goal should be also to transcend those labels. But I feel for a very long time, I took it a little too far and refused to label myself as Muslim because I felt like that was not my responsibility. That's actually for God to decide or for posterity and history to decide. And I think I came across the same forces that you did, where I started to feel that it was the Islamophobes and the oppressive forces within the Muslim world who actually were the very people, this is a very, very interesting story, the very people that Prophet Muhammad was opposing ended up being the people who controlled and spread the message of Islam immediately after his death. That's how that message got distorted so quickly and became what we know today, or what most mainstream people would associate with Islam today. And the more I read the Quran and frankly, the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament and other religious scriptures, the more I felt a compulsion to share that message, the message of the Quran, which is so radically anti-empire, which is so radically pro-human, which is rooted in these stories of human wrestling. And I wanted to share that because I felt like it was our moral obligation to wrestle with those stories and for us to root our understanding and our opinions in knowledge rather than ignorance. And the only way I felt like I could do that was by actually claiming the label of being Muslim and by calling myself Muslim. Now, how I define that is quite broad and probably different than most people would think, but I felt like there was no way that I could fight the oppressive forces without actually entering the conversation and adopting the label quite proudly.
I want to throw in real quick.
Yeah, please.
I've heard it said you have to hate a tradition to love it properly. And I think of that with the struggle, that I mean to stand in this trajectory. I can say Christianity, but I mean broadly beloved community, because I don't believe that God is Christian. And I think one of the big problems is that people think that that is a claim of the tradition. I want to say, too, that a little trick I learned is if someone says, "Are you Christian?" I can say, "Tell me what you think a Christian is," and we can figure out if that fits. We can do that with anything. If so, I'm conservative. Oh, fantastic. What do you want to conserve? Let's talk. Or I'm liberal. Okay, who do you want to see liberated? And we can do that. The labels are the costliest mental shortcut in our lives, and we can drop them. We can say, "What do you mean by that?" We're free to dialogue, to be curious, all this.
But I almost feel like the first step is to adopt the label in order to transcend the label, unfortunately.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I want to be true. I am an adherent and a recipient, and hopefully a faithful practitioner of this tradition. Yeah.
I think something that the two of you share is that you're in this moment where you're frustrated with a system or a label, but you choose to stay. Can you walk me through that? Were there moments that you're like, I mean, Misha, you had this full arc where you actually went like, "No, I'm not this thing," and then you're like, "Wait, I am this thing." I'm curious, what compelled you to stay in that way, right? Like if you hated to love it, what compelled you to love it enough to grapple with hating it?
For me, it's the Quran. I think it's so beautiful, and I find it to be this incredible. This is the way I think about Islam. Islam, by the way, the word means surrender. And to be Muslim is just to be on the path of surrendering. It's quite simple. And the Quran is just a proclamation. That's all it means. And it's a proclamation of, I believe, this divine message that is encoded into the DNA of the universe, which means each one of us can arrive at this message with or without this aid. But it is an aid that comes from my tradition, and it's really incredibly beautiful. It really speaks to my soul. I couldn't let go of the book, even when I called myself an atheist or culturally Muslim, I couldn't let go of the book. And I felt like it was this puzzle that I had to solve. And that puzzle is something that I've come back to over and over and over again, even when I have felt that I am secular or atheist or don't ascribe to the faith tradition. And the reason that puzzle is so meaningful to me is because it gives me a framework to wrestle with the human condition. It's just a language that resonates with me. I think for someone else, it might be something totally different, but that's the tether that anchored me back to Islam and to this particular path to God and to spirituality or my moral framework.
Would you define that yearning to solve the puzzle as God? Like, is that divine? Is that a divine yearning, or is that like a Misha Euceph, I was just kind of born curious yearning?
I think all our yearnings are divine yearnings. And I think this is what goes back to David's overarching message, that there is no, I think one of the funniest things is this idea of separation of church and state. And I think what is happening right now with kind of Christofascism is a problem. But I don't actually believe it's possible to separate church and state. I don't believe it's possible to separate church and anything else. The idea that church is something that you do on a particular day of the week rather than something that informs every single aspect of your living, breathing experience as a human being is an absurd idea. And so I just kind of refuse that. I think there's nothing that isn't spiritual, and we can't pretend that that's the case.
Yeah.
I will say, back to the question, and in this direction, similar, the Bible, I do think of it as the Word of God. I also think of it as the composition notebook of a centuries-long caravan of asylum seekers. Mm-hmm. So it's also that. I love the lectionary. I love reading it. I love trying to be true to the tradition as I understand it. It is said that James Joyce was once asked when he stopped being Catholic, and he said, "You'll have to ask them." And I thought that was really funny, because it was like, I'm still being faithful in my way to that which is true, that which is transcendent. Divinity is the world is charged with the grandeur of God, it seems to me. People within a particular evangelical tradition sometimes talk about, I have a personal, private relationship with God. I don't think you can not be in relationship with God. I think that we're all children of God. I think some of us are perhaps more estranged than others from the love of God, which can't be separated from love of neighbor. So I won't give up. If you're raised on the Bible, you won't back down to anybody ever, in a way. And I'm committed to the tradition. And it's just so important to not get cut out of this conversation or let somebody,
co-opt it.
Yeah, it's worth defending the sacred witnesses of these traditions. I had a Buddhist friend kind of late in my 30s, and probably secretly, I had it in my head that at some point he might say, you're just so cool. How do I become a Christian? But there came a time when I realized, you know what? I don't want him to do that. My own attempt to be true to the teachings of Jesus and the prophets is only deepened and improved by his faithfulness to the Buddhist tradition. So I do now, kind of late in life, have a more interfaith conception of my own pilgrimage. But it is firmly situated in this little tributary called Christianity.
Can I build off of that a little bit? I think one of the things that has been changing about my conception of spirituality or the great spiritual message is I always thought that, and I was taught actually, I think a lot of Muslims are taught that life is a test. And I've recently been feeling like life is actually a puzzle. And not only is it a puzzle, it's a puzzle that we can't actually solve alone. I think that there's a Rumi poem, you may have heard it at like corporate retreats, about the elephant and the different parts and the darkness and whatever. Well, Rumi was a Muslim and he was inspired by the Quran. And there's an incredible New Yorker article by Rosina Ali called Rumi Was a Muslim. And it talks about the erasure of Islam and the Quran from Rumi's poetry. And that particular poem specifically talks about, there's this group of people in a dark room and they're all touching different parts of an elephant. And one person hears the sound and they think it's a trumpet, and someone grabs the leg and thinks it's like a lamp, and whatever. They all have different conceptions. But when the lights turned on, they all realize it's an elephant, and that if they had all just communicated with each other, they may have been able to grasp what the elephant really was. And I think I feel very similarly to you that, I've learned so much from Buddhism about Islam. There's an incredible book called The Tao of Islam, which I highly recommend. Very academic, but really worth it. But I've come to feel that I learn more from others who have followed their spiritual path with integrity and faithfulness than I do from trying to get others to join my spiritual path or tradition. And all of us doing that and sharing open-heartedly and with humility is so much more powerful. And if we piece together those sacred witnesses from the past, and if we learn from our children, if we learn from our contemporaries, then maybe we grasp a much more full picture of the divine.
I'm curious if we talk about a little bit of this current moment. David, you said that, and both of you sort of have shared the sentiment that a different version of your religious tradition has been successfully marketed so well in a way that I think even having a panel like this, right, being like, hey guys, we're going to talk to a Christian and Muslim, everyone's like, okay. So knowing that, do you think like David, we were talking and you're writing a book about U2, like the band. And I'm like, oh, that's a marketing strategy. Like, are the two of you thinking about how to, in some ways, and to use kind of gross language, but like market your view of your faith tradition?
I will tell a quick story, U2-ish. So I was at a dinner party in London and with a friend, and the doorbell rang. And he said, oh, I didn't tell you, Brian Eno is coming. Music producer, I hope he's known. And Brian Eno and I got into a conversation when somebody asked what I taught. I'm a university professor. I said I teach religion and science fiction, to which Brian Eno said, I have a question for you, and it's a question I've had for a very long time, and I believe you are someone who can answer it. I said, bring it, Brian Eno. And he said, is religion just art? And I thought, amazing question. I said, kind of, sort of. Stay with me. I said, I define religion as perceived necessity, because I think there's good religion and bad religion, true religion and false religion. And I call it perceived necessity so that I can critique bad religion. And I said, the most well-armed, well-funded world religion in human history is empire, and it demands human sacrifice. It actually demands the sacrifice of the humanly inhabitable world when I think of the climate crisis. Bad religion, empire. Good religion, art, remembers where empire dismembers. True religion, art, integrates where empire disintegrates. And so it works for me, art being called religion, so long as it's true, so long as it's good. And to relate that to the U2 thing, I do believe that U2 represent good religion. I think that they represent, I know people are upset that that album got dropped on your thing for free somewhere back there. But when I lift up the witness of U2, I am lifting up a sacred kind of art collective among us that really formed me. I can't, it's embarrassing, but Martin Luther King Jr., who was killed just down the road in Memphis from Nashville, was really not on my radar until Pride in the Name of Love came out. I'm an MTV generation person, and I can't explain myself to myself apart from U2 and apart from sacred witnesses like that. So I am always, in all my books, I am trying to push a particular kind of perceived necessity. I'm trying to amplify righteous witnesses among us. And so, yeah, I don't know if rebrand is the word, but it really matters figuring out what we're talking about when we say something like religion.
I have very consciously thought about this specific, and it sounds perverse, but I think it's an important task. I've always felt like Islam doesn't need a reformation; it needs a rebranding. And when I first started doing my series Quran Book Club during COVID, August of 2020. I was just thinking about even the logo of Quran Book Club. Is it something that has the same geometric figures that have been associated with this archaic tradition? Is it greens and golds? And I decided to just use rainbow colors, and it was an animated logo where it looked more like something from The Simpsons than anything that had to do with sacred texts. And that was an important part of the branding. I think Islam was always the people's religion, and that was taken away. It became very much the religion of the powerful. And I feel like if I'm just a layperson and I have the right to talk about these things, and I curse in my regular everyday language. So when I'm talking about this, I'm going to curse, and it's totally fine. And it may offend some people, but I think that all of that is part of branding. I also think we just need more hot girls talking about Islam, I think that's a more
ovation.
powerful that's a more powerful thing than we want it to be. We have a lot of old men with long beards who speak a very specific way, who are talking about a tradition that is supposed to be for all of us. The Quran was revealed in Arabic so that everybody in Arabia at the time could access it. It was an oral tradition. It was revealed in the language of poetry, which was the language of the people at the time, because it was supposed to be accessed. And so I think we just need regular people, and I'm trying to be one of those regular people and maintain and preserve my regularness. And it may not be very sacred seeming at times, but that's part of the branding effort. I think that's deliberate.
Yeah, I got to throw in right quick. Religion, bad religion, opiate of the masses. True religion, poetry of the people. Yeah.
That's beautiful. The last question, which I know I'm saying, we just have a few minutes, and then this huge question. In 10 seconds or less, make this a tweet. Where do we go from here? And how can we think about the work that religion should be doing? And under that question is, especially if you're someone who doesn't call themselves religious.
Who's we?
I would say concerned Americans, and people who can tell, maybe if they can't define it, but can feel that this is not the way we should be living.
I think there's a couple of concrete things also that everyone can do. I think anyone who's concerned should make themselves familiar with the religious tradition that they come from, read the texts, or any religious tradition that you're drawn to. I think it is time that we own the stories and the symbols and use them how they were meant to be used. Jesus is a revolutionary who flipped tables. Muhammad is an orphan who was exiled and sought asylum and was an immigrant who fought patriarchy and an oligarchy that was incredibly powerful. Moses stood up to slavery. Mary was, in all intents and purposes, a single mother. And I think that when we look at what's happening with the ICE raids, for example, or what's happening in Gaza with the genocide, or what's happening with our current president and regime and power, those symbols actually are eternal. We have these incredible ancient stories that speak to the soul, and knowing what they actually stand for and having the textual and scriptural citations to be able to use those, I think takes the power back. Because there's a lot of ignorant people using these symbols. They don't actually know what they're talking about. And when you start fighting with actual knowledge, their power dissipates pretty quickly. So I think the most practical thing we can do is arm ourselves with knowledge, read the things and own the symbols.
This one, Daniel Berrigan, the Jesuit poet, once said, "Stand where you must stand, be human there." The job is to be who you are, when you are, where you are. And we're all have different contexts. We're all in different places. I'll quickly throw in the Reverend James Lawson told the story. He taught my nonviolence course at Vanderbilt. He pastor here in Los Angeles. He was in Memphis. He invited Dr. King to Memphis when the sanitation workers strike. He trained John Lewis in Nashville in the lunch counter sit-ins. During the lunch counter sit-ins, the students had committed, signed a kind of pledge card of I'm not going to lash out when I'm spat upon, when I'm called racial slurs, when I'm threatened with violence. And Lawson's job, this is 1959, Nashville, is to remind the students of their commitment and also tell the gathering mob of Nashville citizens, if you punch them, they're committed to not punching back. So think that through in terms of cowardice and courage. And in the middle of that, a guy pushed through the crowd, fell in a leather jacket, spat in Reverend Lawson's face, called him the N-word. And Lawson looked him in the eye and said, "Do you have a handkerchief I could borrow?" as the spit was rolling down his face. And the guy, not thinking it through, just gave him one. And then he took it, wiped his face, and said, "Is that your motorcycle over there?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And he said, "What's the horsepower?" And he started engaging him in that moment. And in time, the guy said, "Is there anything I can do to help you people with what you're doing?" It's completely disarmed. I should say the handkerchief trick did not always work for people. But he did it. He shared the story. And I raised my hand and said, how do you become someone to whom it would occur to ask for a handkerchief? Or whatever the unexpected, creative, poetic response might be. And Reverend Lawson said, what you have to do is keep in your mind an imagery of infinite possibility.
Right.
Which does not sound easy, but it is something like poetic, prophetic, internal imagination. And to, stand where you must stand, be human there. And I think that's the human task in front of us.
Thanks so much for listening. If these conversations resonate with you, you can explore more episodes, writing, and ideas at notes.reculture.tv. And if you'd like to learn more about Reculture, our sense-making studio focused on brand, culture, and media advisory, our home is reculture.tv.